Our coastal barrier islands provide many things. They serve as the mainland's first line of defense against the impacts of coastal storms and erosion. As the first line of defense during storms that threaten coastal communities, barrier islands are very important for reducing the devastating effects of wind and waves and for absorbing storm energy. Barrier islands are long, narrow offshore deposits of sand or sediment that run parallel to the coastline. They are separated from the mainland by a shallow sound, bay, or lagoon and are often found in chains along the East Coast and the Gulf of Mexico. Our coastal ecosystem also includes the Great Lakes, where enormous bodies of fresh water play an ecological role similar to the oceans. The islands themselves are separated by narrow tidal inlets. Coastal barrier islands are unique landforms that provide protection for diverse aquatic habitats. They provide habitats for fish and wildlife, shorebirds and migrating waterfowl, and a variety of animals and plants unique to the coastal ecosystems. Our coastal ecosystems include estuaries and coastal waters, where stream and river systems meet the sea and are mixed by tides. Our unique coastal ecosystem includes saline, brackish, and freshwater, as well as coastlines and adjacent lands. Today, these species and their habitats face serious threats in coastal regions from human population growth and development. Population projections indicate that the human population will continue to grow in our coastal areas. Our coastlines will continue to receive the majority of the nation's growth and development, potentially compounding today's habitat losses. As our coastal barrier habitats are degraded or eliminated, plants and animals unique to the coastal ecosystems can suffer severe population loss.
The Coastal Barrier Resources Act is a federal law and was passed by the U.S. Congress in 1982. The act established the Coastal Barrier Resources System, or CBRS, and defined areas located along the Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, Great Lakes, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Island coast. Congress amended the act when it passed the Coastal Barrier Improvement Act of 1990. These areas are defined on a set of maps maintained by the Department of Interior through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The acts were specifically implemented to minimize loss of human life by discouraging development in high-risk areas, reduce wasteful expenditures on federal resources, and preserve the ecological integrity of areas Congress designates as Coastal Barrier Resources System and otherwise protected areas. COBRAs and OPAs are commonly referred to as COBRA zones. Most federal expenditures and financial assistance are prohibited within COBRA zones. Federally regulated mortgage lending and federal disaster assistance is not available in these areas. The prohibition that is most significant to homeowners and insurance agents is the denial of federal flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program for new or substantially improved structures within the Coastal Barrier Resources System. The Coastal Barrier Resources Act doesn't prevent development. It imposes no restrictions on development conducted with non-federal funds. The Coastal Barrier Resource System contains two types of system units: Coastal Barrier Resource System units and Otherwise Protected Areas, or OPAs. Coastal Barrier Resource System units are generally comprised of private lands that were relatively undeveloped at the time of their designation within the CBRS. The boundaries of these units are generally intended to follow geomorphic, development, or cultural features. Once again, most new federal expenditures and financial assistance, including federal flood insurance, are prohibited within system units. OPAs are generally comprised of lands held by a qualified organization, primarily for wildlife refuge, sanctuary, recreational, or natural resource conservation purposes. The boundaries of these units are generally intended to coincide with the boundaries of conservation or recreation areas such as state parks and national wildlife refuges. The only federal spending prohibition within OPAs is the prohibition on federal flood insurance. With the Coastal Barrier Resource System and other protected areas, the boundaries are established and mapped by the Department of Interior, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. CBRS units are located in 23 states and territories along the Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, Great Lakes, Puerto Rico, and U.S. Virgin Island coast, throughout FEMA Regions 1 through 6. If you have a building in one of these areas, even though it is in an NFIP participating community, depending on its date of construction, you might not be able to sell NFIP flood insurance on this building. Basically, if flood insurance was purchased prior to the identification date of a CBRS or an OPA, then flood insurance can be purchased and maintained. However, if a building is newly constructed or substantially improved on or after the identification date, then flood insurance is prohibited. So the designation date of the CBRA and OPAs are important. As I stated earlier, federal flood insurance is available within the Coastal Barrier Resources System if the subject structure was constructed or permitted and under construction before the CBRS unit's prohibition date. If an existing insured structure within the Coastal Barrier Resources System is substantially improved or substantially damaged, that is, damaged or improved to over 50% of the structure's market value, then the federal flood insurance policy cannot be renewed. For new or substantially improved structures located within an OPA, federal flood insurance may still be available if written documentation is provided certifying that the structure is used in a manner consistent with the purposes for which the area is protected. For example, a state parks visitor center. On older flood insurance rate maps, COBRA and OPAs are identified by backward slanting, broken diagonal line patterns on flood insurance rate maps or firms. The identification date of the CBRS or OPA areas will be on the firm maps. For example, this CBRS area was designated November the 16th of 1990. If the date of construction of a building is before November the 16th of 1990, then yes, you can sell flood insurance. If the date of construction of the building is after November the 16th, 1990, then no, you can't sell flood insurance on that structure. On newer digital firms, COBRA and OPAs are outlined by a dotted line. The identification date of the CBRS or OPA areas will be on the firm maps. For example, this OPA area is designated on November the 16th, 1991. To find the building's date of construction, either ask the insurer to check the deed or talk to the lender with the mortgage on the property. You may also go to the city or county property assessment website, wherever the building is located, and check there. Coastal Barrier Resource Act determinations should only be made using the official Coastal Barrier Resource System maps, which are available on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's website. Since 2006, COBRA's boundaries have been placed on updated firms through the interagency agreement with FEMA. However, the CBRS boundaries shown on the firms are for informational purposes only and can serve as a first alert that a property may be located within a CBRS. But the firm should not be used to make a definitive in or out COBRA property determination. A building in a COBRA or OPA will also be identified in Section B of the elevation certificate, along with the designation date of the protected area. Remember, you can sell flood insurance on a building if its date of construction is before the designation date, as long as the community has joined and is participating in the NFIP. You can't sell it if the building was built after that designation date, even if the community participates. Another way to find out if a building is in a COBRA zone is to check with the mortgage company. Every lending institution before a loan is made is required by law to determine if that structure is in the special flood hazard area, and if it is, flood insurance will be a requirement of making the loan. Usually, lenders will use a flood zone determination company to make the actual determination. They document the location on a special flood hazard determination form. On the form, in Section C, checks for flood insurance availability and documents if the structure is in a COBRA zone and its designation date. Another way to find out is to check the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's official CBRS mapper on their official website. In response to Superstorm Sandy, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has made an interactive Coastal Barrier Resources System mapper available to the public. The mapper can be used to help insurance agents, property owners, and the public determine whether or not properties are in a COBRA zone. However, the boundaries depicted in the mapper are not to be considered authoritative for in or out determinations that are close to the CBRS boundary. Areas called CBRS buffer zones and depicted on the map by the red slanted line on the borders of the zones. Remember, map is not to be used for definitive in or out determinations. So if you have a property in a COBRA buffer zone close to the border, you might need to request a CBRA determination. Insurance agents should send requests for CBRA determinations to the NFIP direct servicing agent or their NFIP write-your-own insurer. The insurer will send the request to the NFIP Bureau, who in turn will submit the case to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for an official determination. The NFIP Bureau will ensure that all needed documentation is provided and will track the case through to resolution. After receiving the official CBRA determination from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the NFIP Bureau will send formal notice to the insured. To find out if your community has a COBRA zone, check the CBRS section of the Flood Insurance Manual. There you will find a listing by states of all the communities that have COBRA zones. If a federal flood insurance policy is issued within the CBRS in error, it will be canceled and the premium refunded. No claim will be paid, even if the error is not found until a claim is made. CBRS boundaries cannot be changed by a letter of map amendment. Aside from 3 minor exceptions, only Congress has the authority to modify boundaries of the CBRS through legislation. Let's take a look at a case study. Let's go to beautiful St. Padre Island in the great state of Texas. Here on South Padre Island, they built a Hilton Garden Inn in 2010. Very nice hotel right on the Gulf of Mexico. By checking the hotel's firm, it turns out that they built this hotel in what is now a designated OPA, otherwise protected area. Checking the CBRS mapper, we find a similar result. The hotel is in an OPA. The OPA was designated in 1991, way before the construction date of 2010. So, can you sell flood insurance on this hotel? The community of South Padre Island does participate in the NFIP. The correct answer is no, because the Hilton Garden Inn was built after the OPA designation date in 1991. Well, we've come to the end of Coastal Barrier Resources Systems presentation. Be sure to check out our Coastal Barrier Resources System splash page for further information and links. This is Melanie Graham thanking you again for joining us here at the NFIP training.